Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about frequency separation. Now, this is a technique which is quite often used in portrait editing. It's commonly used for being able to separate colour to skin texture, essentially, which makes things a lot easier to smooth out for colour without altering the texture. Okay, so to do this, it's relatively simple. It's got a complicated name and it sounds like a complex operation, but really, honestly, it's very, very simple. Okay, so to start with, we're going to duplicate the layer a couple of times. Now we can either do that by pressing Control or Command J, depending if you're a Mac or PC user, or you can right click and you can duplicate the layer. Okay, so should have a couple of copies now. Now if you're a good Photoshop artist and you're being nice and organized, you can rename your layers. So this one's going to become color, and this is going to become texture. Okay, so go to filter, then blur, and then to Gaussian blur. Did I pronounce that right? Gaussian blur? That's how I've always said. Some people say Gaussian blur. I'm sure you can correct me if I'm mispronouncing that. Okay, so we're going to just apply any value here. It doesn't really matter too much. Okay. Coming up to the texture layer. Going to go to image, then apply image. Going to select the color layer, invert it, and then we're going to go from multiply all the way down to linear light. Actually, it's add, apologies. By default, the scale should be 1. We're going to change that to 2. Okay. It's just that I've done this several times and it does remember settings in Photoshop. So as long as you've got it set to color for your layer, or layer 1 copy, or whichever your naming sort of convention is, that'll be fine. You've taken it down to add, not linear light. That's the next stage which we're going to apply. Okay, so click OK. Going to go up to normal. This time we're going to go down to linear light. Now it looks like nothing's actually happened whatsoever, but essentially if I take off this layer and I zoom in, you can see we've got colour, and then if I take off all these other layers, we've got texture. Okay. Now the power of this is that we can then go in, have a look for any blemishes like there are on the neck. Use the clone stamp tool. Make sure your layer is selected, and we can start taking out the texture. Now it looks like the actual blemish is still there, and that's really to kind of further emphasize the fact that we've now actually separated the image. So what we can now do is we can come into here. Actually, let's bring up our opacity. We can slowly start getting rid of the blemish. Always make sure your opacity is up high, otherwise it doesn't work at all. Okay. There we go. Lovely. Now, there's a more effective way of doing that, rather than having to go all the way around the image doing this. This is going to smooth out any sort of inconsistencies in the skin. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this layer. So Control or Command J, or right click and duplicate on the layer, and we're going to go up to filter, then blur, and then we're going to apply a surface blur. What this will do is going to really smooth out the skin. Now, dependent on how fake you want this to look or how stylized you want it to look, we can obviously change this slider. At the moment this is looking a little bit too much, so we're just going to dial it back just a bit. Depending on the speed of your computer or the size of your file you're using, this will dramatically alter how quickly it will give you this preview render. Unfortunately, I'm using a Mac Pro, so it doesn't really take too long to sort of render this preview. Click OK, and what this will do, it will apply the effect. Again, this may take a little bit of time, dependent on the speed of your computer. Now, if you're sensible, what you can actually do is you can actually make this into an action, and I'll talk to you about actions in another video. Okay, so the effect is almost done. Excellent. Okay, so this looks a little bit over the top at the moment. What this has done is applied a global effect to everything, and what we really want to do is only affect the skin. So what we'll do is we're going to come down to add a layer mask, okay, and then we're going to invert it by pressing Command or Control I. Essentially what it looks like, it's taken off the effect. So to resurrect that, I'm going to come up to our brush tool, press B on the keyboard, make sure white is set for a foreground. You can toggle that by pressing the X key. Okay, and then we're going to apply a filter by just gently painting with a soft edge brush over the image, just like so. And we can alter that strength in a moment by just changing the opacity slider. Now, obviously this is all dependent on whether or not you like over-processed looks. For this series of images which I've been currently working on, I've been trying to create a Rembrandt style look, and this really does dramatically help. Okay, so essentially this is the effect which you end up with. Now, as I say, you can toggle the strength of it by just taking the opacity back a little bit, and there we go. Now what we could essentially do is come back onto the texture layer, just check for any other inconsistencies or bits which we're not happy with. Now there's a smudge here which I'm not too keen on, so what I could do is I could create another layer above, get my clone stamp tool. This time I'm going to change it to current and below. I'm just going to sample this skin texture here. I'm just going to paint it over like so, and I'm going to come up to this skin layer. Oh gosh, take that off, take it off current and below, and just keep it on current layer, and then just going to equalize out that texture there. That's better. Okay. Just go around checking for any other inconsistencies. Now, when you're beauty editing, sometimes it's quite good to leave a few imperfections on, especially if it's like a birthmark or something like that. Of course, this is completely subjective, but as I've always said, to achieve perfection you have to have imperfection, otherwise it just doesn't look real. Okay, so I've purposely left the mole on his neck, but just need like little skin bumps and things. It's quite easy just to get rid of, and just smartens up the picture. Obviously, you know, if you're doing this in a professional shoot and someone's come in with a scratched nose for a car crash, you don't really want that on the front of your magazine cover, do you? So anyway, thank you ever so much for looking, and that's a very quick demonstration on frequency separation. Again, if you have any sort of questions, concerns, if you like it, dislike it, hit the like or hit the dislike, I don't really mind. And well, thank you very much for listening, and stay tuned. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you like, and I shall see you in the next video.